Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome on into your FreightWaves NOW Community Spotlight. I'm Kaylee Nix, and we've got Mary O'Connell here on the line to talk about the coolest community in freight and give us the highlights from this week's episode of Running on Ice. Mary, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys know that this is the one and only spot to start your Friday off right.
Absolutely. And to really get your weekend going on a good note as well. It's summer, which means that most of us are taking summer Fridays and skipping off work early. So I give you permission, as soon as you watch Running on Ice, get on out of the office for the day and take a nice little afternoon siesta on your Friday. You've got another good episode on the way for today. You are talking to Jason Thamm, who's CEO of Newlogy. And I know you've talked to them a little bit before, but give us an update on kind of where they've been and where they're at now.
So this week we actually kind of dive more into something that I've always been kind of curious about. We've obviously covered a lot of pharmaceuticals lately, and so this time we really kind of got into the expiration dates that come with pharmaceuticals and kind of how to manage that and different ways that you can work around that because it's the same way that your strawberries and your blueberries and your fresh fruit expires. You've got pharmaceuticals that expire as well, but it's not just like, oh, I'm going to eat a cantaloupe or I'm going to eat some slightly wilted lettuce. It's not that. It's like, oh, I literally cannot give someone an expired drug because that could potentially do extreme harm to them.
Yeah, I note that I am both picky, but also not picky when it comes to expiration dates. And this is actually interesting because it can kind of tie back to this week's episode of The Stock Out. Mike Baudendistel and Grace Sharkey were talking about the rise in ultra processed foods. And if you think about it, like some of these foods that we have are like way too shelf stable for my liking, right? Like there's no reason why bread should sit in your cabinet for 4 months and not have mold on it. That's crazy. But it's different when we look at it in the pharma world, right? As you mentioned, giving somebody a drug that's expired or something like that could quite literally be lethal to them. So when you're talking about establishing date codes and establishing expiration dates, what does that look like in a pharma standpoint? And are there kind of standardized ways that companies do that? Or is it each to their own discretion while still being within the limits of the FDA?
So obviously the FDA regulates everything and says, this is your window. This is what you can and can't do. And each company kind of does their own thing. But for this most part, like everyone knows from the moment that, let's say you have just like a vaccine, and the moment you put everything together, that clock starts. That's when that expiration date clock starts. So if you know that the second I mix this up for a measles vaccine, that I know I have 3 months to use it before it becomes ineffective. And so that's really where that demand planning aspect comes in as well. Because if actually let's change it to a flu vaccine because that's much easier for everyone. But if you know that, okay, it's September, October, that's usually when people start getting their flu vaccines. And if they've seen a flu outbreak, maybe it's somewhere else in the world, then they can kind of gauge about how much they'll need. And that's when they can kind of start mixing things appropriately, because kind of like the same way we actually use this analogy on the show today, the same way that you have brownies, your flour, your sugar, and all of your dry goods are going to be pretty shelf stable. But those eggs, those are going to expire first. And then the second you mix them all together and make brownies, we'll suddenly only have a couple days to eat them before they go bad, get stale, are no longer delicious. Well, the same principle kind of applies to vaccines and other pharmaceuticals, because they'll have all the separate ingredients. It's just a matter of managing those expiration dates of those ingredients, combined with, once I make them the drug that they are, or the medicine that they are, that's when the real clock starts. And that's when I know that I have to get these out on the shelves and hopefully sold, because obviously no one really wants to destroy medicine or destroy things that could have helped someone due to kind of some poor forecasting.
So there's kind of, I think, three main ways where this ties back into the supply chain aspect, right? The production and manufacturing, the transportation of the goods once they've been made, and then the storage before it goes to full-on distribution. Starting off with the production and manufacturing, where does technology sit in kind of managing those efficiencies to make sure that you're not adding the eggs into the brownies way too early and then letting the batter sit in the fridge for like 6 weeks without actually being baked?
I would say that the technology sits like directly at the center. Obviously, the machines and everything that you use to make them and the production facilities are the number one thing, but the technology that goes into knowing what we should run today, how long it can sit, and all that other stuff. I would say that that is a huge lift on the technology side of things because you have all these systems that can help, demand plan, forecast, know, okay, and there's even some systems, and we really get into it today with Nulogy they that says they can manage it just by expiration dates. So just because maybe you received a shipment of goods on the 13th and it's the 15th, well, you don't necessarily have to ship out that one that came in on the 13th, that first in, first out kind of thing. It's going to be more, okay, well, I got the shipment on the 13th, but the one that I got on the 14th, it expires first. So we're going to send that out. So that's where that role of technology comes in, is knowing that, okay, just because I got this first doesn't mean that it necessarily has to go out first. We can manage by expiration date. So that way we can, ultimately reduce the amount of waste that could potentially happen throughout our supply chain.
So the next piece on that goes to the transportation aspect of it, which we've touched on a lot because that is kind of like the most relevant to us, right? And a lot of that comes down to temperature storage and making sure that your items are safe during transport. Is that really our biggest priority when we're talking about navigating the proper expiration dates and times for these products, is making sure that they are truly stable and protected during transport?
I would say it's half the battle. Half the battle is getting the product to the shelves, to the pharmacies, to the hospitals, wherever it needs to go. Half the battle is getting it there safely. And that is that transportation aspect of it. All those amazing solutions that we've seen that, gets things from point A to point B in a shelf stable and a temperature controlled environment, which we absolutely love. But when it comes to actual, like, okay, it's there. Well, what are we going to do with it? Well, that's where that demand planning and that forecasting and some of the technology that Nulogy offers, that's where they come in and say, okay, well, we know based off of XYZ spikes here, here, and here that this product is going to go quickly and it's going to be in high demand. So that's why we've sent you some. Or we know that, like, we have it here, but we have some kind of on deck waiting should you need more. And that's where that demand planning, forecasting, technology lift comes from, is that knowing to have the right product in the right places at the right time.
So the last piece of that is that storage and then eventual distribution to your consumption point, whether that be a pharmacy, a doctor's office, a hospital, et cetera. A lot of that comes down to, again, as you mentioned, demand planning, right? You don't want to continue ordering shipments if you know that you have this backstock sitting in the very back of your fridge that never sees the light of day, because then you end up with moldy vegetables in the back of your vegetable drawer. Speaking for myself right now, I need to clean out my fridge. But let's talk about that to kind of wrap it all up. When you're talking about planning for this, how do you make sure that you have enough of what you need, but not so much that you're leaving things in the back of your fridge to rot?
Well, ideally, you would have fantastic demand planning and forecasting, and everything would go perfect exactly how you forecasted. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So it's really kind of, as cheesy as it is, it's planning for that unexpected part. So you know that, if we're entering hurricane season in the Southeast, so maybe stock less of certain things in the Southeast, because if a warehouse, or just shift some of your production to a different warehouse. So that way, if there's a hurricane that comes and destroys everything and shuts the operations down for a few days, you're not completely left high and dry. But a lot of it does come down to those training policies that you have in place and a strong kind of technology aspect of it, of kind of setting yourself up so it's harder to fail and having those resources that you need to be successful. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to training people throughout your entire organization, throughout the entire supply chain, to say, okay, well, just because if I'm the pharmacist, just because I got this shipment in today doesn't mean that I need to immediately use it. I need to go and look at all my expiration dates and make sure that I'm pulling correctly and making sure that my techs are aware of what we're pulling next, and kind of have those conversations, because those pharmacies get busy. I don't know if anyone's ever sat there and watched them try to fill a prescription at CVS or Walgreens or anything, but like they'll just have baskets surrounding the pharmacist, and I'm just like, this is exhausting. So it really does come down to a whole team approach of everyone understanding exactly what's expected and kind of how everyone can do their own part to reduce the waste of potential product or medicine that could have otherwise helped people.
Well, we love to see it, and we love to get a deeper dive and more explanation coming up on today's episode of Running on Ice. Where can people go to find that one, Mary?
Well, just keep watching YouTube. And like Kaylee said, it is Friday during summer. Those of you who have summer hours, maybe leave around 12-ish, 1-ish. No worries. On your drive home, you can just you can pop on Running on Ice. It's on Spotify, Apple playlists. I don't recommend watching YouTube while you drive because that's, kind of illegal. But yeah, you can find it today at 2:00 Eastern right here on YouTube, or like I said, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if that's not enough, you can subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/running on ice.
There you go. Thanks for that, Mary. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.